Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the critical issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. At Issue tonight, Governor Bryant ordered this week another round of mid-year state budget cuts due to lower than expected revenue collections. This is the third time during the current fiscal year that the governor has been forced to adjust the state budget. He's ordered a $43 million total budget reduction, plus a $7 million transfer from the state's rainy day fund to balance the budget. Those exempt from the cuts are the Department of Mental Health, Child Protective Services, Emergency Management, Schools for the Blind and Deaf, and Student Financial Aid. The governor tells MPB's Teresa Collier he believes state agencies will be able to absorb a less than 1% cut.
What we do every year, we look at the revenue and we project. We get some very smart people together and say, what do you think the revenue will be? And sometimes we miss it. If you miss it by 1% and you're dealing with a $6 billion deficit, so that's $50 or $60 million. So that's probably where we're at. We're about 1% off on projections that we made a year ago. So I pulled $7 million out of the rainy day fund. It still has about $300 million in it. That's our reserve fund, and made about a $43 million cut so that we will have a balanced budget. It's an accounting responsibility that the governor has, and to make sure that we've got a balanced budget.
So what do you say to those agencies that have to make those cuts now? What are your thoughts or suggestions?
Well, I think they need to understand they can manage less than a 1% cut. In the governor's office, we're operating on the same budget that Governor Ray Mabus was operating under in the 1980s. We've cut our travel budget by 95%. So I think they can adjust to that. They also have to know we can't print money. All we can spend is what money that we have coming into the state of Mississippi from taxes and other sources, and we cannot run a deficit, so we have to adjust the budget. If revenues, I think they will continue along this line. We may have to make other decisions in the future, but if we're going to balance the budget, we have to make cuts when times are more difficult, as they are now.
What do you say to legislators who are considering the 2018 budget? What do they need to take into consideration?
One of the things they need to do is only spend 98% of the money. The other 2% of that money needs to go into the rainy day account. This is a perfect example of why we pulled down on that account. But if you spend only 98% of it, if you miss it by 1 or 2%, you're still at a balanced budget category. So we need to be more accountable. This budget has grown more than 30%. Over the last 5 years. We put almost $1 billion more into the budget this year than we did in 2012. You can't sustain that type of growth in government no matter what state you're in.
So what does this say about Mississippi's economy when you have to keep making these cuts?
Oh, well, I think it says the same thing at 30 other states. 30 other states are having to make this adjustment. California's got a $1.5 billion deficit. This national economy has been in a slump. It has been for several years. Nobody wanted to admit it. The administration did a very good job of trying to tell everybody things were fine. It is not. If you look at what the EPA did to the energy sector, we are 13th in the nation for production of oil and gas, and that has basically stopped because of the regulations from the Obama administration. Those are being taken away. We're going to kick that industry back into high gear again and begin to produce goods and services that will generate tax money.
All right, we got to go.
Can I get education? You're thinking of a special session. What do you?
Yeah, I think what we're looking at now is how we go about spending money in education and what are the outcomes. And we would like to know that we get more children that graduate from high school. We'd like to know that they're doing a better job in reading and math. We'd like to have this a teacher and student-centered formula. Just now it spends more money on the administration. So if we have an agreement between the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker, I will be eager to call a special session to improve that formula. It is an old formula. It's been around since the late 1990s. It needs updating, and I think now is the time to do it.
So you're meeting with the President and Vice President this weekend?
We'll be this week.
So what are you going to talk to them about?
We're going to talk to them about energy. We're going to talk to them about Obamacare and what the future of that looks like. We're going to tell them that Medicaid is out of control, that spending across the nation in Medicaid is more than anyone can afford. We'll talk to them about law enforcement and how we make sure that we secure our borders and this state and the people who expect to be protected by our police and military. All those things that are of interest to Mississippi. I'll be meeting with the Secretary of Education and telling her what I think great advances that we've made in Mississippi and how we can share those with the rest of the nation.
Republican House Speaker Philip Gunn says the budget projection is done a year in advance. He tells MPB's Teresa Collier not hitting it within 1% doesn't mean there's a crisis. Gunn also commented on what to expect on rewriting the state's public school education funding formula.
Well, we always are making a point to live within our means, and that's where we're going to stay. That's the attitude of the current leadership. Anytime that we have an opportunity to downsize government, we do, and we don't apologize for that. Sometimes government can be too big, and I think it probably has gotten to that point. So it's not a bad thing to have to reduce the size of government. We've made a practice of living within our means, not spending more money than we have, and the governor has made additional cuts. The economy across the country is lagging, but in Mississippi, we have I think we've got a lower level of unemployment than we've had in the past. We have got, I know the stock market's doing well, so we don't apologize for reducing the size of government. I don't think that it's a bad thing to do. The governor is just making us stay within our means.
What does this say to lawmakers as you're considering the 2018 budget?
Well, again, we just want to make sure we stay within our means. So as we evaluate the revenues and how they have come in, we want to make sure we stay within that. You know, it's a hard thing to project a year out what your revenues are going to look like. A lot of things can happen in the world and in the nation that affects the economy, and we want to make sure that, like I say, we try to project a year out what we're going to have. We've missed it by 1%. It is not the devastating impact that a lot of people want to portray it to be. To come within 1% of projections is a pretty good idea. Sometimes we're above that by 1%, sometimes we're below that, and we have to make adjustments when that happens.
But this is the third cut this fiscal year.
That's true. That's true. Revenues are down each month, and we're just making a practice of staying within our means, and we're not apologizing for that.
So on the issue of education, the governor, you've talked about a special session possibly for education funding or looking at a different formula. Where are we with that?
We're continuing to work that. We want to make sure that we do it right, not that we do it in a hurry. And that is where we're at. We're continuing to make sure that what we do is correct before we do anything.
Are you looking at a new funding formula? How much are you taking into the ed bill into the consideration?
Yeah, that was the stated goal from the beginning, was to find a better way of funding our schools. Superintendents complain from year to year that they are unable to project because of the volatility of the current funding formula. So what we're doing is bringing in a way that's a little more predictable, a little more stable, and superintendents seem to embrace that idea.
We've talked a lot on this program about the need for road and bridge improvements across the state. The speaker also addressed efforts in the House to fund infrastructure projects.
We do have 2 vehicles alive right now. Those will probably be the only 2 vehicles this session. This is an ongoing process. We have put forward an internet sales tax collection, which will hopefully generate between 100 and 150 million, and the bond bill to do $50 million for bridges. We've also met with MDOT and asked them to produce $50 million of savings, which they have given to me, but I have not yet reviewed. If all 3 of those mechanisms go into place, we're looking at somewhere around $200 million that will be devoted to roads and bridges, which is a huge step. The analysis that I have seen indicates an upper level of about $375 million. So we will be more than halfway there addressing the issue if those measures are adopted. And then, of course, moving forward in the future, we'll evaluate what other options may be available. But I think that's a huge first step this session to address that problem. Obviously, when revenues are down, it makes the effort more challenging. Doesn't mean we don't stop or that we stop looking. We continue to look, continue to search for ways. I don't think a tax is going to be a solution, so we've got to look for other solutions. That's what we'll do. Well, obviously, infrastructure is a big part of economic development. Companies, when they consider your state, want to know, do I have the ability to get my products to my factory? Do I have the ability to get my product to the market? What's the quality of life for my family if I move them here? And roads and bridges play an integral part of that, as do schools and jobs and other things that we're working on. So it's a big deal, and we're making it a top priority and have put forward some real solid measures that, if adopted, will help address some of those needs in the near future. It doesn't mean we stop looking for solutions as time goes on.
The Senate wants to give more property tax breaks to bring in business to the state. Senators overwhelmingly passed Senate Bill 2939 this week. It calls for lowering the threshold to qualify for a fee in lieu of taxes from $100 million to $60 million, that is. The state can negotiate with companies to bring in big business developments at a rate as low as 1/3 of the normal tax rate for up to 10 years. Democratic Senator Bryant of Amory voted in favor of the bill, but offered some food for thought on whether the state should continue giving tax breaks to attract business.
This is the dilemma in which we find ourselves. Nationwide, there is competition for new manufacturing plants. So if every other state is granting tax breaks and paying for portions of new industries and all of this, I don't see how Mississippi can unilaterally disarm. And so we, regardless of the merits of this proposition, it's going on nationwide, and to some extent, Mississippi has to play the game. I have suggested for some time that it would be well if we would look at the various incentives we're giving to new industries and determine which ones are the most cost effective and have some sort of general rules and procedures, because it sure seems to me everything takes place on an ad hoc basis. That never seems to happen, but it's a continuing concern. But the dilemma that was raised by the questions is the dilemma in which we find ourselves. There are two widget companies. One widget company has been operating in Mississippi forever, and another widget company wishes to locate an industry in Mississippi. Well, certainly we want the additional industry to locate in Mississippi, but to what extent is it proper for the state to give a competitive advantage to the new widget maker at the expense of the existing widget maker that's been sitting there paying taxes, hiring employees, paying salaries low these many years? And suddenly there's a new girl in town and you forgot all about your old sweetheart, you know. So the suggestion was made, well, maybe we'll grant a similar break to the existing industry. Okay, but when you do that, you're shrinking your ad valorem base. And when it comes time to collect ad valorem taxes, the taxes which are collected are spread over the existing base. So if what you do is remove some property from the ad valorem tax base, that raises taxes on everybody else. It raises taxes on car tags, it raises taxes on homes, it raises taxes on retail businesses. It's a dilemma in which we find ourselves. I certainly do not have an answer for it, but I do think it's important for all of us to think, and I suppose the most troubling thing about this situation to me is it seems we're just in this mess, and every decision that comes along is made on an ad hoc basis because this seems good, that seems good, the other thing seems good, and when you put it all together, we don't have anything approaching a rational policy. I support this piece of legislation. I support doing what's necessary to attract additional industry to the state. But I implore members of the Senate, and I implore all of us to step back and let's look at our various programs and let's look at what rules we would have in general terms to operate by, because if there's any general policy, I don't know what it is.
Well, let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the aisle. Austin Barbour is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of the Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney with the Beria Jones law firm and a former member of the House. Gentlemen, good to have you with us as always.
Thanks.
Austin, welcome back.
Thank you.
Brandon, you were here last week. We talked about a possible budget cut. It happened. Is it about what we expected?
Yeah, I think so. Size of the cut, $43 million. I think that brings the entire three cuts up to $151 million on the year. You know, this is where we are. I think you just heard from Republicans and Democrats describing the situation, and although we might have a different understanding of how we got here, no one is saying that it's great. And so we have another round of cuts. Almost every agency, I think now with this latest round, is up to 1%. There's one thing I would take issue with that the governor said. The governor kind of looked at this and said, and he's done this each time he's made a cut. He's talked about how it's his obligation to make a cut when the economy meets or doesn't meet a certain trigger. He's right about that, but that's not the point. The point really for Mississippians is why is the Mississippi economy not performing? And we talked last week about what our state economists and what the Treasurer's Office had to say about that. Our GDP is lower than it was in 2008. Our real unemployment figure is at about 10.8%, almost 11%. Our per capita income is second lowest in the country. And so by any metric, our economy is not performing. And I think that there was probably some expectation that the corporate tax cuts that went into effect would start to bear fruit at the income tax level. But it doesn't seem to be the case. And so it's a very precarious time. Our budget makers are dealing with it. And I think that's why we see more entertaining of some of these more unique ideas for how you raise revenue.
You know, I really want to get on the table and scream and argue with Brandon, but I'm not going to do that today because some of what he says is true. I mean, there is reality. The numbers that we see, we can't lie about them. There are definitive problems with sales tax and income tax collections. They're just not where they need to be. That's the bad news. And when that happens, the governor does have to make cuts. The Constitution says we have to have a balanced budget. So he's made these number of cuts, Brandon, as you alluded to. But there are also good numbers that are out there. Our GDP is up from where it was last year. Our unemployment number is down. And I know you'll argue with me about what are the real unemployment numbers, like we used to argue about with Barack Obama would talk about unemployment being down. But those numbers are down from where they were. Building permits are up. We created more jobs last year than we did before. Do we need to create more jobs? Yes, we do. But I think that you defined it as a precarious situation. I don't know if that's the right adjective to use, but I can't argue with it because there's good news, there's bad news. But I got to come back just for a second. We talk about the tax breaks. And you were not hyperbolic with, I wish you would have been hyperbolic, but you were not hyperbolic with what he said. This is going to take several years for these tax breaks to actually begin and then go into effect and then be measured. We got to give that time. Whether that's fair or not, I think that's important, that we let that process work itself out.
You know, when we went and looked back at Governor Bryant's campaign promises coming into the second term, I was reminded of one of these statements that he made about a paycheck for Mississippi, with the idea being that we were going to cut corporate taxes, but we were going to make sure that those corporate taxes ultimately became income tax cuts for folks at the blue-collar level, folks working to get their way into the middle class. And you and I talked last year about the 3.3% or so income tax cut. I think I may have joked that it wasn't that much, and you made the point it was. I think you were right.
Correctly.
It's an important point. It's an important point. I shouldn't have scoffed at that. But I think that from a Democratic perspective, we want to sort of say that paycheck for Mississippians has really become something of an invoice for Mississippi. Folks fighting to get into the middle class in this state do not have an easier go of it at this moment. Whatever kind of metric, whatever type of statistic we want to cut. And that's the big problem. And so we can talk, I guess we're all in the habit on this show and over at the state capitol, and I don't begrudge anyone for doing it, we're all in the habit of kind of putting our best spin on whatever the issue is. And that's part of this dance of democracy. But we had three major issues coming into the year, or at least three priorities as I saw it. One of them was we were going to finally get down to that other level of tax cut that would affect, working professionals, folks who were needing a leg up. Then we were going to do infrastructure. And then we had all these promises of overhauling the state educational system. we may get to the state educational system. We may have a new formula, maybe this year, maybe in a special session, maybe next year. But this is not a government that's solving problems. I mean, we're struggling with this budget. We're struggling. I mean, what Philip Gunn just said a moment ago, it is encouraging to me that the Speaker cares about infrastructure, but we're nowhere close to the type of thoroughgoing infrastructure plan that this state needs to really be the type of community that we're competing with elsewhere. So we don't have an answer there. This education thing has been kabuki theater. I mean, we keep being told it's going to happen, but we can't see it yet. And there's supposed to be a smart group of people working on it, but none of the chairmen of any of these committees seem to be working on it. Who on earth is working on it? So it's just it's a lot of things. It's a slow and fading economy, and it's a government that's not really answering any of the big questions.
Brandon covered a wide range of topics there, and I left my pad and pencil backstage to be able to take notes. Listen, you know, I think one of if I can sing the praises of this show for a moment, I think one of the great things is that this guy and I can sit across the table and you can moderate a debate, and we don't have to scream and get mad at each other. We're going to disagree. We're going to disagree a good bit about philosophical issues. And here again is where we are. I believe in Republicans that are in control of the legislature and the governor. I think that they fully believe that the way that we grow the economy, not in this sort of, 3 yards up the middle, but in making some big plays, if I use my football terminology here, is we've got to cut taxes. We've got to lessen the dollars that we spend out of the general fund on state government. We've got to bring down the number of state employees that we had. That doesn't necessarily mean let's go fire all these people. That can mean we've got, I think I saw the number, 1,999 positions that are unfilled right now. Do we need to fill those? I think they can make an argument. No, we don't. That saves $20 million right there, or $15 million. But we just have a different philosophical agreement. And I don't want to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. We talked about this before. We need to be able to come together and find where can we come up with compromises to make sure that we're doing things that are moving Mississippi forward. And I think that's where we are. But we've got to be able to do it and have these kind of real debates and real conversations and get stuff done for the folks who put us in office. Well, not us literally, but I'm sort of speaking.
So that can happen on this program, but does that happen enough at the Capitol?
I have seen it. The last 2 years has been better than it was the 2 years before that. I'd love to know what Brandon's perspective was when we had a different governor and Billy McCoy was speaker.
I think we've seen sort of a national degradation of our politics, and I think partisans on both sides of the aisle have poisoned the well. I think if you have extremists in a caucus, whether it's a Democrat extremist or a Republican extremist, it really chokes out the opportunity for real compromise. I think of myself as a pragmatist. I like to think that I'm open to considering something, even if I might not like the idea on the front end. I want to make sure every option's on the table when it comes to solving the state's problems. I think, Austin, you see yourself in a lot the same way, although we might disagree about some of the, the way we get there. I don't see enough pragmatism in national or in state government. And I'll give you an example of that. We saw it in some of these recent House fights. I've yelled at Austin about this. These guys who get up there and can't even contemplate different opportunities to help to meet our crisis of infrastructure funding because they made some type of promise about taxes or fees before they got here. That's one example.
But there's obviously examples on the Democrat. You're talking about sort of fiscally conservative Republicans who say, I'll never vote for a tax increase. That's sort of the example you're giving. And I can give examples of, Democrats in the past or now who are saying, I will never do this because of particular reasons. So.
You mentioned national politics. This meeting that the governor's going to have with President Trump in Washington, what do you think might come out of that for Mississippi?
And I do want to get back to one point real quick, Wilson. When Brandon makes this point of national politics is kind of trickling down to state politics of being so partisan, I really think it's more about the individual. I think Donald Trump has brought a lot of that. Hillary Clinton has brought a lot of that. Barack Obama has brought a lot of that. With Philip Gunn, Tate Reeves, and Phil Bryant, they're just not the sort of in-your-face kind of guy that's out doing tours around the state, really trying to rally the cry to have this big partisan feel. Look, Haley was way more partisan. He was pragmatic, but he was way more sort of partisan, rallying the base than Phil has been, obviously because he had to do that to try to get things out of the House. But I think so much more of that is the individual. In terms of what Phil Bryant's going to ask Donald Trump, I think it's going to be about Medicaid. Are you guys going to block grant federal dollars for Medicaid? Let us figure out the right way to spend those dollars that work best for people that are in the Medicaid system in Mississippi. And I think the other thing is going to be infrastructure. We've got this huge problem. I know y'all are working on an infrastructure bill that you'll try to get through Congress in 2017. What might that look like for Mississippi in terms of dollars and projects we can use them on?
Well, one of the things that our governor has bragged about is his relationship with the president. You hope in moments like these that that's put to good use for the state. So what do you say other than go up there and do us proud, make a good pitch, make sure that Mississippi is prioritized, and let's see. I think what you were talking about, though, with respect to where we are in terms of the national tone is bombast. I don't think these guys who are running Mississippi now are bombastic. I would agree with that.
National level.
I would agree with that.
Yes.
But Philip Gunn did go to the Neshoba County Fair and said, only send me Republicans. And if you don't send me a Republican, don't be surprised when I don't work with your district. That's one of the most partisan statements you'll ever hear. And so partisan, yes, maybe not bombastic. And we've got to do better. Democrats too.
We'll let that be the last word. Brandon, Austin, thank you both for joining us on At Issue, and we thank you for joining us on At Issue. We're out of time for tonight. Remember, you can check out the show on our website, mpb.org/issue, mpbonline.org/issue. Please join us again next week. Have a good night.